Hi there, back again. Let's finish our discussion of Gorgias so you can get on to looking at that forum and working on it. So let me make a couple comments about the last bit of the Gorgias that I had you look at. Some of these arguments will be repeated again when we get to Boethius. So it's a good thing just to see them now, think them through, and make them more familiar to you. So what's going on in this second part is we've got two discussions, one between Polus and another one between Callicles. And we just look at the beginning of the Callicles discussion with Socrates. Polus has taken over the conversation. So the conversation, remember, initially was with Gorgias. And Gorgias, when he gets shown his contradiction, stops talking. And it's not quite clear why he stops talking. No, it doesn't say any reason why he stops talking. It's something to think about. Is he embarrassed that he was caught up in that contradiction? Is he wants to think more about that? Is he worried about that contradiction since it involved his own goodwill and good character? And he says he would teach somebody to be just if they weren't just already. Um, we don't know. Polus is a very different sort of person, though. He's very brash. He seems to be young. He's a pupil of Gorgias. He wants to defend Gorgias. You remember at the beginning of the dialogue, he says, well, I'll give the speech instead of Gorgias because Gorgias is tired. So he feels like he's, I guess, like I said, he's a protector of Gorgias. And he's going to step in and he's going to show Socrates what's what, that he's embarrassed Gorgias somewhat. So the first thing that Polus says that gets this whole thing going is that he believes that the order has the greatest power. And the order's power would be something that people in the city would envy. Like a tyrant, the order can do almost what he sees fit. He can convince anybody of anything, and so he can convince people to do all sorts of things. Have people put to death, confiscate their property, banish them from cities. It's kind of odd, isn't it, that Polus picks these nasty sort of things. He doesn't pick good things. Uh, um, Maybe it's a proof that the orders saw themselves as actually inflicting punishment on the city. I don't know. Socrates comes back and wants to make a couple points. The arguments I think are somewhat simple, though they can be a little bit hard to follow. Polus has no problem following them, so clearly he's trained in argument. So Gorgias has been teaching him for a little while. And what happens over the course of things is he starts off with one point. Socrates says, well, really? Do you really think that? And Socrates shows logically how it's got to be some other way. So amongst those arguments, the first one would be this one, that doing what you see fit is not power. And this one works because Socrates gets Polus to agree that power is something good for its possessor. Now, why would Polus agree to that? Well, of course, he's going to agree to that because he says power is the order has the greatest power, and that's put across as a good thing. So power should be a good thing. Then the argument proceeds rather simply that if orders and tyrants who do what they see fit without intelligence, well, they do bad because they can't have any guarantees that what they're doing is going to be the right thing. They don't have any expertise at all. So it seems to follow rather quickly, orders and tyrants do not have any power. Okay, if you do bad, that can't be good, so that can't be power. That might seem a little bit of a trick to you, but I don't think it is. I think that's something just I want you to think a little bit more about. If power is good, then doing bad is not a powerful thing. That's the way Boethius will put it. The second part of this is to argue that doing what you see fit is not doing what you want. This one is a little more complicated, but let's look at it. So orders do what they see fit. There's Polus's point. Socrates spends a little while trying to tell people that anybody who does something for the sake of something doesn't want the thing he's doing, but the thing for the sake of which he's doing it. Seems a little complicated to put it this way, but if you think about means to an end, that any action you do for the sake of an end, you want the end and not so much the means. The means are just a way to get there. So it follows from this that orders do not want whatever they see fit as doing. Again, those horrible examples, killing people, taking their property, etc. But they want the benefit that they believe those things bring. Now, in the situation where those things are bad and don't bring any benefit, then the order is not benefited by them. And so Socrates concludes the order can't be wanting that sort of thing. If the things they see as fit are actually bad, then the order is not doing what he wants. Okay, so what's falling out of here as an implication is doing what you want is benefiting yourself. And maybe the general point is doing what you see fit is not doing what you want. At least not, it's not necessarily, it's no guarantee. And that's what Socrates wants to show. That doing what you see fit need not be something that you want to do, even though you do it. Polus and Socrates continue to talk. Polus seems somewhat convinced, but somewhat not convinced, and they play a little bit on what people would want to do, what would they like to do. Feeling pain isn't necessarily something we want, but painful things might be chosen for the sake of something else. And so there's something played on this. And then they get to the point where Socrates brings up the fact that who's more miserable? Is it the person who suffers wrong, or is it the person who does the wrong? And this is a point you might remember from the Apology. And here's Socrates' argument that doing worse is evil than suffering, is worse than suffering it. He gets Polus to admit that it's more shameful. If one shameful thing is more shameful than another, the excess of shame is due either to evil, pain, or both. So he gets Polus to agree that doing evil is more shameful than suffering it. And Polus readily agrees to this. And so either that shame is due to pain, which doesn't seem to be the case because the person suffering it is probably in more pain than the person doing it, or it's due to evil. Okay, you might wonder, is there another choice here? Because they don't bring anything else up. Okay, and if it's not pain, then it must be evil. Therefore, it follows that it's worse to do evil than to suffer it. Again, another fairly simple argument is as if Socrates is saying, you just haven't thought these things through very carefully, Polus. The second point is about being punished. Do people who are punished for evil, there's a mistake up there, being punished for evil is worse than doing unpunished evil, that's how I put it, is worse than being punished for it. And Socrates argues here that punishment brings those guilty of wrong to justice, and he sees it as sort of liberating the soul from the evil that they've done. And so this follows very quickly once you put it that way. That someone who inflicts wrong but doesn't get punished never gets liberated from that evil, and so they're in a much worse state than the person who has been justly punished. Again, if you see punishment as fixing things, okay. Consequently, it is worse to commit a wrongful act and escape punishment than to commit wrong and be punished. Okay, well, so what? Why is all this even coming up? Well, this is very relevant to our point about rhetoricians. Okay, if we believe that rhetoricians do bad because they don't have any true knowledge of the good or bad that they're doing, and they persuade people through pleasing them to do things, then we have an instance where we have somebody who's doing evil and someone who's suffering it. Well, who's worse off, the person doing it or the person suffering it? Well, we just prove it's the person doing it. So the rhetorician or the orator is worse off than the crowds that the orator is trying to persuade, whether they think it or realize it or not. And since the rhetorician persuades the crowd and gets them to do the things that the rhetorician wants, the rhetorician never gets punished for doing that. So not only is the rhetorician worse off because they're doing evil to the city, they're even worse than if they were punished because they're putting themselves in a situation where they won't be punished. That's the implication of this argument, and that's the implication that finally sinks in, I think, to Polus, and he probably doesn't see a way out of it. And so let's just finish this with the last little bit, enter Callicles, because this is a very different kind of argument. So Polus thought Socrates hadn't thought about this correctly, and he wanted to argue and show Socrates he was wrong. And Socrates ended up showing Polus that he was not wrong. In fact, that Socrates was right, and that's the way the reasoning goes. Callicles comes in and says, we know the problem with this isn't the arguments. Your arguments are correct. It's arguing in general. So what Callicles is doing is throwing out philosophy completely. We should not be philosophizing about this. We should be doing something else. So a couple quotes I pulled up to give a sense of how Callicles is thinking. First of all, Socrates, I think you're grandstanding in these speeches, like acting like a true crowd pleaser. Notice how Callicles is insinuating that Socrates is just another rhetorician. Nature shows us the just, he says. The superior rule the inferior and have a greater share than they. So there's a kind of might makes right, survival of the fittest view. That's the true view. So what reason tells us is not what's so. What happens is what's so. Thirdly, abandon philosophy and move on to more important things. Callicles goes on, philosophy is no doubt a delightful thing, Socrates, as long as one is exposed to it in moderation at the appropriate time of life. But if one spends more time within it than he should, it is the undoing of mankind. Think about Callicles as speaking maybe the sorts of things that the Athenians would have said to Socrates and why they eventually had him killed. And then finally, it's not shameful to practice philosophy while you're a boy, italics are mine, but when you still do it after you've grown older and become a man, the thing gets to be ridiculous. So that's Callicles, and we're going to stop there. We didn't read much further into how Socrates responds to Callicles. The reason I brought it up is what we'll see in Callicles is we'll see a lot of Nietzsche. This is Nietzsche's response to Socrates. It's not that Socrates is right, that his reasoning is correct. It's not that he's made a mistake in his reasoning, and if he reasoned a little better, he'd come to a different conclusion. It's that he's reasoning at all. There's nothing to reason about. Reasoning doesn't get you anywhere. It's maybe a nice pastime, sometimes something to while away the day, but it's not the way the world works, and it should not be relied upon. Good. So I'll leave you there with that, and we'll move on to the Phaedo next. Thanks. Goodbye.